Hi, hello, hello, hello. Happy Friday. In baby reindeer news, that lady, Martha, that the character is based on, her name's Fiona Harvey. She's suing his ass. Baby reindeer is getting sued by the stalker lady. Um, so we'll see what happens with that. I'm reading about it now. Anyway, wanted to pass that on. Okay, I don't want to spend too much time on topics today, so I'm gonna try to talk very briefly and then open up the panel. Um, so we're getting back to the story map, and plot formulas, and all that. We came up with kind of four quadrants of our map. Let's just do it this way. I work a lot with stories, with telling my own story, listen to stories of other people, helping them tell their stories. Very roughly, if you want to start to tell your life story, you just draw a V, and the bottom of the V, put the lowest point in your life that you've dealt with so far. And there's going to be other low points on the way down and low points on the way up, etc. But in general, if you start to map out your personal story, at some point it's going to make roughly a V or a U shape. So when we tell stories about moving up, progressing, moving toward a goal, an ideal, integrating into community, etc., stories of ascent, we're in the part of the map we're calling comedy, or the genre we're calling comedy. When we're telling stories about the way down, the descent, stories about a fall, a personal fall, a decline, a collapse, we're telling stories in the tragic part of the map, or the tragic quadrant. So those are really the two directions the plot can move. So two of the quadrants are plot or action related. You're either moving toward a goal or toward integration. Comedies are stories that involve joining people, joining groups, communities. Tragedy is about separating the individual, separating from the herd, the group or ideal society collapsing and separating from larger society, etc. So those are two parts of the map, and the quadrants are kind of going to overlap. The other two are not so much talking about actions or directions a story can move as ways of looking at a story. And remember, in comedy, we talked about like the basic comedy formula, like in any romantic comedy you go see at the theater, I guess on Netflix or wherever you get your movies now, Discord. Is going to follow you. You basically have a guy try to get a girl. There's a father or a rival or some male figure that represents the existing society that's trying to, or that is somehow creating an obstacle that he has to overcome and get the girl. And at the end of the comedy, he gets the girl, and there might be a wedding or a celebration, etc. And all of that is a basic comedy formula going all the way back to Greece, Menander, Plautus. Um, and Frye makes the comment that he says, we realize that the crudest of Plautine comedy formulas has much the same structure as the central Christian myth itself, with its divine son appeasing the wrath of a father and redeeming what is at once a society and a bride. So the Bible itself also kind of follows that comic plot structure. Um, the other two parts of our map, and this is a map for kind of locating our stories and where we are in our stories and where our stories are in relation to other stories. So these two ways of looking at, if you remember in comedy, the action is the let's say the son trying to get the bride, the girl, and he has to overcome the resistance of the father, etc. So we have a little plot like structure right there. You have a the guy, the main character, the protagonist, let's call him a hero, and he's trying to overcome an obstacle to his desire or his ideal woman or whatever. And he overcomes it at some point, and then he achieves his reward is not only the woman, but the new society or whatever the woman represents, a new life, a new society for him. So you kind of have a hero, a challenge, and then some kind of reward or transformation or establishment or restoration at the end. Well, that little plot structure there is the hero's journey. And so the other two quadrants were romance and irony and satire. And those are less plots, although the hero's journey is kind of the comic plot looked at in a particular way. And that way is the romantic way. Romance in this context involves, it's kind of looking at things from afar or looking at things before you've experienced them. It's looking at them kind of in a state of hope, anticipation, desire, ideals, dreams. It's remember the two myths we talked about, the myth of concern or the myth, the stories that hold society together in our modern world. The Christian myth was the latest. And then this other myth of trying to understand things as they are, or kind of maybe looking at that myth from the outside and critiquing it. Romance is looking at a myth or a set of stories from within those stories. And so you idealize the stories. They're rich with meaning because your perspective is coming from within. And then that other point of view was kind of the perspective from without. And that's more like the tries to be rational, at least empirical, observational, etc. And so those gives us two more quadrants of our map. We have a way of looking at things that's kind of, I remember growing up, like we'd always take family vacations to, like, in our case, it was Astroworld in Houston. It was a big Six Flags park. It was a lot closer than Disneyland. And as a kid, we'd find out we were going to Astroworld and get all excited. And I would start planning this trip out in my mind weeks ahead of time. I would start imagining the rides we were going to ride and the things we were going to see and the car trip up there, etc. And I would just get so excited thinking about this upcoming experience. I was looking at it from a very romanticized, idealistic, hopeful view of what I wanted the trip to be. Remember, like one set of stories is to kind of describe the world we want to live in, not the world as it is. And then, of course, when you get there, the trip is never that way. And my mom told me one day very early, she said, don't plan out your trip like that because it's not going to happen like you're planning, and then you're going to get disappointed. And so if you don't put that effort into envisioning it in the first place, you'll have a better trip. And so I tried that and it worked. And so from that point on, I just kind of remembered that little lesson about overly romanticizing things. And then when they actually happen, when you experience them, you have this second perspective of experience. So, or like romanticizing is like picturing a far off country you want to visit that you haven't visited yet. So all the stories in your head and the images that come to you, that you tell yourself, and the emotions around it of this far off exotic land. And then the other perspective would be the perspective of experience. And I think I'm going to start calling these the romantic and the realistic, or the William Blake gives us innocence and experience. So it's from the perspective of, say you've lived in this country for a while and you know the ins and outs. That happened to me when I came up here. I very much romanticized Seattle, the Pacific Northwest, the outdoor culture, the nature, the guy I was coming up here to see, etc. And then when I got up here and started actually experiencing the culture, a second perspective developed that was more realistic, more critical, a little more objective in the sense of looking at it from the outside. And it gave this second set of stories from outside of the myth, or from within this second myth that develops and kind of looks backward at the originating myth. So we have stories about integrating, joining, moving into community, connecting, relationship, desired society. We have stories we tell ourselves, especially on here, about catastrophe and trauma and betrayal of trust and exiles from groups and ostracism. Our whole channel is called Outliers in Exile. Okay, that's your tragic side of the map. You can locate those stories on that side. And then within comedy and tragedy, you kind of have two ways of looking at it. You could look at it romantically, kind of this idealistic. Romance is useful because it's a clue to our ideals. What's important to us? Where do we find our meaning, etc. But at the same time, it's always kind of defending itself against this perspective of experience. We see that on the stream a lot, where people will start telling a story or a conspiracy or something that they imagine to be true, and I start critiquing it and like trying to bring some real world examples into it, or start looking at it more realistic or concretely. And there's like this defense that kicks in. There's something that wants that story to be that story and the meaning that comes from it. And so these two perspectives are kind of in tension and resist each other. And so at the center of the romantic way of looking at things and this idealized way of life for society, we have the figure of the hero that represents the ideals of like our personal ideals of society. As far as Western culture is concerned, we can go back to Achilles, Odysseus. Those were foundational heroic ideals for the Greeks. And then eventually in the age of rationalism, we can use the figure of Socrates, perhaps Plato. The Christian ideal would be Jesus. The Hebraic or Abrahamic ideal might be somebody like Moses or Jacob that became Israel, etc. So you have these like hero figures, and the stories we tell about them, we're usually going to idealize because they reflect the values that are important to us. Now, the hero's journey itself, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail of. It's online, and you can find it. Joseph Campbell did a lot of work on it. Robert Bly did his version of it with Iron John, and then Jordan Peterson, of course, has his version of the hero's journey. The basic stages are you have like just an ordinary person in the ordinary world. There's this call to adventure. There may be a series of adventures that test and try and develop the hero. And then you have eventually this kind of descent and this confrontation with an ordeal. Like it could be the dragon, the enemy, the villain, whatever's causing the kingdom to decline or fall into decay or threaten the kingdom. The hero overcomes in this final battle and wins the bride or restores the kingdom. And this, either the same society transformed or the hero himself transformed, or a new society takes the place of the existing society. So we have that same little comic structure of an initial society or an incipient society against an initial society that tries to integrate or overcome or displace it, and then the resulting establishment of that hero's world and society. The reason I want to at least introduce the hero's journey, I think I did a whole episode on it last year, but I'm not sure. But I've talked about it plenty of times, especially in like context of the men's work I do, because it shows up there a lot. And the hero, like the archetype of the hero itself, is kind of under attack lately and like being questioned and reevaluated. And in a sense, this happened in Greece too, with the transition from Achilles to Odysseus. Odysseus was kind of an implicit critique of some of the values of Achilles, who was the prior hero. And so you kind of see a shift in values even between those two that parallel some of the things we see today. And excuse me. That's one thing I noticed. Just this is an aside, but going back to the DEI implicit bias stuff, it seems like there's some idea, like the message is be yourself, express who you really are, liberate yourself from these constrictive societal expectations and norms, etc. and so it's encouraging all these identities to come out and express and be their authentic self, or even more of what they are, etc. Except that some identities are getting a different message. It's don't be yourself too much, kind of hold back and suppress yourself because it could impact other people or make them feel bad. So like men are being told to like be aware of their impact, and I was told at a training that because I'm tall and male, I have to be aware of how I might impact the people around me. And then gifted people are like being told to give up our programs and kind of like assimilate back into the mainstream because it's making people feel, I don't know what, left out or unequal or something. So if you're gifted or male or Christian maybe or straight, I don't think the message is be your authentic self. I think it's try to hold back a little bit, be a little bit less of yourself so these other identities can come. So it's not a consistent message. And that's something I noticed with this DEI stuff too. It's like a logical inconsistency that I can't resolve for myself. So the reason we're talking about the heroes, and when we tell heroes journey stories, we're telling stories about overcoming obstacles, and those stories come up a lot, especially in personal growth, personal development work. Our whole personality map is sort of a hero's journey from within. And the reason I'm bringing up the hero's journey is because this is leading up to something I'm going to talk about next week, which is what happens when the hero's journey is the romantic, it's the fantasy quest, it's the King Arthur story, it's the hero killing the dragons, it's Dungeons and Dragons, it's all of our fantasy video games, everything. What happens when that becomes kind of a model for stories about that we tell about ourselves, our personal stories that we tell about ourselves? Harold Bloom has an excellent essay on the Romantic poets' use of this myth to model their internal creative processes and internal attempts at personal growth and self-transcendence. So we're going to look at that next week. We're going to take this hero's journey into the individual psyche and see what patterns and potentials emerge from there. So I think I'm going to, I want to give one little illustration of everything I'm talking about with this romance realism thing. I romanticized Seattle and the dude I came up here for. And once I got up here and things started to kind of break down and I started to get a different perspective of him that was less idealized and more realistic, etc. At some point in that experience, the two perspectives started to exist side by side and cause an immense amount of cognitive dissonance. I could see the person that I thought he was and the experience that I thought I came up here for, and the way I thought Seattle was. And I could see I could see me seeing him how he actually really was, the sociopath, how Seattle really was, how this experience was going to be. And so that idealism started to disintegrate into realism. And there was a point where I could see both of them like almost equally. It was two competing visions of reality at once. And that's that like third level, that second level, that spontaneous unilevel disintegration, where suddenly you have two equal things side by side, and eventually one of those had to take precedence for me to develop out of that that stasis, that logjam I was in from having both of those visions locked side by side and not knowing which one to navigate from. So that's going to tie into our personality map as well as we look at the internalization of this hero's journey. So I'm going to drop the link and check comments, and we can start the panel. Yeah, Brandon, there's a whole bunch of panels out there in YouTube, and I've noticed you going on some that I think are going to be more in line with your mission to get your followers and promote Looney Tunes, etc. This is kind of really an X-rated, let your hair down, sometimes let your drawers down panel. And I don't want to kind of merge it with something more G-rated and risk having it reported. So that's what's behind that. It's nothing against you. I admire what you're doing. You're doing fantastic. I think you're a model for a lot of other people out there, and definitely keep doing it. But I need to draw a line between that and what I'm trying to do on this panel. So that's the story there. The optics are high. That must be Moose. Let freedom ring indeed. Yes, freedom, not liberation. Like, because to me, the people that are needing liberation or stuff, they already have the same freedoms we have. They're American citizens. They're not using it for some reason, or don't know how to use it, or don't want to use it. But it's the same freedoms that we're celebrating. They could be celebrating too, but they want this thing called liberation because they're not experiencing the freedom we're experiencing in the same way. They're experiencing something called oppression. And I don't know if they're experiencing it because it's taught, or it gives a story for their subjective experience. Like it lets them make sense of, I can't get ahead, I can't be successful. And then these stories come along, or, oh, that's called oppression. And now there's this thing called internalized oppression, where your mental health symptoms are actually, like if you're anxious, depressed, etc., it's actually the external oppression that you've internalized. So it's not even coming from within you. That's also a symptom of this external oppression. And so the solution is to become an activist and fight oppression and fight for liberation. Yeah, that's right. That's right, Brandon, but that's changed. So there's other panels you're gonna out there that you can find to go on. So that's the story. Oh, but I checked the news. It's all stuff. I'll casting on Twitter to check. Well, there is this one little quote. Let's see. It says well, let me get back to it. If the internet is a homogenation machine and women are high in agreeableness, then women will generally homogenize at a faster pace. Make of that what you will. There's also a reply to it that says, I feel like men self-select into niche areas of interest more than women too. Perhaps. I mean, I'm certainly trying to make this a niche. Oh yeah, I want to make one more point about romance. Frye says that the central form of the quest romance is the dragon killing theme, as we talked about, and it's a land ruled by a helpless old king, and it's laid waste by a dragon or a sea monster to whom one young person after another is offered to be devoured until the lot falls on the king's daughter. The hero arrives, kills the dragon, marries the daughter, succeeds to the kingdom, etc. In the Bible, we have a sea monster, usually named Leviathan, who is described as the enemy of the Messiah and who the Messiah is destined to kill in the day of the Lord. The Leviathan is the source of social sterility, blah, 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 blah. Where is... Hang on, I lost my place. He does a lot of work on. So the point is that not only does the Bible follow the comic structure, but it also can be looked at romantically. There's two ways to look at the Bible. Some scholars that are looking at it more realistically and objectively see it as a collection or fragments of writings of different authors over time, kind of hodgepodge together, which it is. It is that, unless you believe that it was written by Moses or one person. But that's a mythological way of looking at it. But there's also a way of looking, like within those fragments, the form it exists in now, the Bible that we know it. Let's say the King James Bible. There's slight variations, different Bibles. can be looked at as a single unified work, even though it's made up of multiple different pieces from different authors and stuff. You there's a perspective you can take on it that unifies it into a hero journey, like a romance tale, a comedy story. And so Frye does a lot of work on the Bible and like tying it into what types of stories it is and what types of stories it can help to tell, because it still is the central myth of our culture, of Western culture. That is still the dominant story that we kind of use to reference all our other stories to and organize at least all the stories we've told ourselves since then. Um, much like Homer was for the Greeks, etc. So I guess that's the point I wanted to make. I can't find the actual quote, but oh yeah, the Messiah as hero of a redeemer society, but in the secular quest romance, um, actually, that's not really important either. I find when I want. Oh, good. Well, good. It can be double as an ASMR video for people that. Thank you, Frank, for people that can get that benefit. I've never personally thought of myself as the ASMR type, but I'm I'm here to help. Well, this might be a short show today, which is fine. There's plenty to do and watch. And then I'll be there this weekend, but we'll just do open panels, and then I'll pick up with topics again next week. Um, we'll do that internalization. That's how I roll and rock and roll. My very first podcast during COVID, when I like the romanticized version before I actually started, was going to be called Rocking with Satan, because I already knew that I was going to be like there was no way to stop myself from rocking. So I was going to try to incorporate the rocking into the podcast and call it rocking with Satan. And it was going to be like a pun on rock, but also physical rocking and talking to guests. And it all made sense in my mind. Frank, this is definitely a troll. This is master trolling. This might be peak trolling. In fact, this is one of your best trolls ever. Are you getting restless, Frank? Is it time for Survivor already? I'll give the panel like 5 or 10 more minutes, and if nobody shows up, I'll shut it down for the day. There you go. That's a lot of people's favorites, it turns out. Yes. I didn't like cartoons as a kid. Like the grown-ups were always trying to make me watch them, and I never understood why. I wanted to see real people. Like The Price is Right was way more entertaining than a cartoon was. Um they were like little drawings of animals. They weren't people. I wanted to see real things. Well, I didn't understand the point of watching TV to see little fake people with human voices talking over them. Oh, just when I thought the trolling couldn't get higher. I guess that wasn't peak. We did. I did go on. Well, you know what? If that's what you're after, Frank, you should catch episodes of him and Simon Hectic. They have a great rapport between them. And if you haven't watched Brandon assist Hank with his debate prep, that's another must watch. You will see a side of Brandon that I'm not sure any of us expected. So I love seeing the Spurgs team up in a way that they don't get to do in real life, I think. That happened last night too on the show. I loved it. All right. Well, how are we on the countdown? I hope Chuck is okay. He's probably out having another one of his adventures. Spurgery at its finest. That's what we do here. That, in fact, that's going to be one of our marketing slogans. Thank you, Frank. We'll spell it correctly, but we'll get it marketed. Spurgery at its finest. The luxury spurgery here. I'm excited. Well, I'm doing my part. I'm doing my duty. I'm holding the space, and if no one shows up, I feel fine with that. My conscience is clear. All right. Yeah, that works. Unless somebody happens to come on in the next, say 2 minutes. I'll meet you in DC. We're gonna pick up the they just had those 3 people return to the game. The resistance. Fuck, I really. Ken, Tommy, Bex, or I5. Well, it won't be Tommy. But yeah, any of the other 3 are welcomed up. They all make fine guests as far as I'm concerned. I would like to start getting. Here's my struggle. My goal from the start was kind of to have some more of the like philosophically oriented intellectual guests and have deep dive conversations into topics. But then that ran the risk of getting a little too nerdy and dry. Although I think the conversations we've had on here with those type of people, like Steve, Shade Tree Intellectuals, our friend Steve, he's a great example. I wouldn't say his conversations are boring or dry at all, but they are definitely intellectual and philosophical in the way that I like and that I'm looking for. So I was trying to find more of that for the channel, but it's integrating it into the kind of third space, hangout, kind of cut loose, loosey-goosey, neurodivergent, spurgy side. Because though the first type of conversation requires a little more structure and facilitation than the loosey-goosey kind. So it's kind of fun in a way to meld those. And that's not even so much the issue because I can do that. It's if we do too much of one kind, it drives away the other kind. That's the problem. It's like the riddle with the fox and the chicken and the grain, and you have to get them all across the river, but you can't have the wrong ones in the boat or on the island at the same time, or one will eat the other. So it's trying to figure out how to be attractive to the nerd type while at the same time being a beacon for the like lost spurg types too. Because I want both. I definitely want both. I'm still trying to figure out how to do it. And I don't want to do 2 channels. Okay. Was that 2 minutes? Yeah, well, Frank, I don't know where you've been, but Chris and I have done many, many episodes with AI interviews. In fact, one of the biggest fights we ever had started with, I don't know if it was our conversation with Socrates and AI Jesus, but it got into the question of gravity and God and science. If science can't prove gravity, then that means God could possibly exist or something. And me and Chris got really, really, it got intense. And this chat GPT was like feeding it along the whole time. Yeah, I did have my suspicions. This is more of a like participatory experience for you, not something you go back and consume. It's not content. It's like live action. So, which I like when you're here when you're here participating, it does become its own experience. And that is separate to me from the content that somebody would get just rewatching a stream. I love people like seeing what can be done with content. I love people that make clips of people's contents or remix. Like Neurojack sometimes throws our clips into his little video montage remixing. Some people will play our videos and comment on them. Some people will restream or make little clips and so I love all that. Like just the art, the creativity of it. Well, can you get VC, like start working on making VC the place to be, get the snacks laid out, the popcorn, the whatever else, light the hookahs up, and I'll be there in like 2 or 3 minutes. I think I'm gonna shut this down. At least I got my topics out. All right. If anyone wants to join Frank and I in Discord, we're gonna be watching stuff the rest of the day probably. And if not, I'll be here tomorrow for open panel. Same time, 2 p.m. Central. All right. Take care, everybody. Have a good weekend.